So today, we're going to talk about working smarter. We're going to learn how to filter out the noise so you can find the real problems.
Okay, let's dive right into this. I want you to imagine for a second that you are the controller of a massive, global manufacturing firm. You sit down at your desk, log in on a Monday morning, and the numbers just start rolling in. It's an absolute avalanche. How do you manage thousands of daily data points without entirely losing your mind?
Let's quickly run through our roadmap for this explainer to solve exactly that. First up, beating information overload. Second, defining what an exception actually is. Third, the variance investigation process. Fourth, weighing the pros and cons. And finally, we'll wrap up with your winning CMA exam strategy.
All right, part 1, beating information overload.
If you've ever felt completely overwhelmed by data while studying for your exams, trust me, I see you. You are definitely not alone. It happens in real-world accounting every single day. Your system is just generating endless lines of data. We're talking labor hours in Singapore, material costs in Brazil, utility bills in Chicago. If you genuinely tried to review every single line item across a global firm, you would quite literally never sleep. And worse, you'd never actually manage anything because you'd just be stuck reading historical reports all day long.
And that brings us to our solution, Management by Exception, or MBE. Read this definition with me. It's the practice of focusing management attention only on areas where actual results differ significantly from planned results. I really want you to internalize this. It's the ultimate filter and an absolutely core philosophy of the entire CMA syllabus.
Moving right along to part 2. What exactly is an exception?
So, in a perfect textbook world, our actual results would match our carefully planned budgets exactly. But we all know the real world has some wiggle room. So how do organizations actually define that wiggle room? Well, you generally have two distinct buckets to evaluate. On one side, you have quantitative criteria, and on the other, qualitative criteria.
Let's break those down a bit. Quantitative criteria, those are your hard numbers. That might mean a company rule to automatically investigate any variance over $5,000, or maybe anything that's more than 10% of the budgeted amount. But qualitative criteria, that is about the very nature of the cost itself. Even a tiny dollar amount difference in something like a critical safety cost or legal compliance budget could be an exception. Why? Because of the massive, high-stakes risk involved if something goes off track.
Now listen closely here, because this is a massive exam pro tip. Do not fall into the classic trap of thinking exceptions are only bad things. Significantly favorable variances are also exceptions. You absolutely cannot ignore them just because they look good on paper.
Think about it like this. Let's say you pull a report and see you spent 30% less than planned on direct materials. You still absolutely must investigate. You have to know, did your team find an incredibly efficient new way to work, or did someone accidentally buy low-quality, cheap materials that are going to cause huge product failures down the assembly line?
All right, on to part 3, the variance investigation process.
So what are the actual mechanics when an exception pops up? It's basically a 4-step process. First, measurement. This is where we calculate the variance, just like we've done with price and efficiency variances in our earlier modules. Second, significance testing. You ask yourself, does this meet our MBE thresholds? If yes, we move to step 3, investigation. This is where we step away from our desks, go talk to the shop floor managers, and find out if this was a one-time spike in electricity or a permanent market increase in steel prices. And finally, step 4, corrective action.
Let's zoom in on that final step for a second. What kind of action do we actually take? Well, it entirely depends on if the cause is controllable or uncontrollable. If it's a controllable issue on the shop floor, say an operator wasting materials, we intervene and fix it immediately. But if it's uncontrollable, like a sudden global market price change for raw goods, well, we can't fix the global market. Instead, our corrective action is to update our future budgets to reflect that new reality.
Okay, time for another huge exam tip from me to you. Let's connect this to another core concept you're learning. MBE goes hand in hand with responsibility accounting. When we find an exception, we only report it to the manager who actually has the authority to influence that specific cost. We do not spam the entire executive team. We report strictly to the responsible party.
Section 4, weighing the pros and cons.
As an aspiring accounting pro, you know every single framework out there has its trade-offs. What's really interesting here is the human element it reveals. On the advantages side, yeah, it saves immense time, prevents information overload, and directs scarce managerial resources super efficiently. But look at the disadvantages. If your thresholds are too high, you might entirely miss a small problem before it balloons into a complete disaster. And honestly, perhaps more importantly, it can be really demotivating for employees. Think about it. If the only time you ever hear from your manager is when things are exceptionally wrong, your morale is going to tank. A really great CMA remembers to occasionally celebrate the standards results too.
And finally, Section 5, your winning CMA exam strategy.
As your teacher, I want you going into test day with total confidence. First, you absolutely have to know the difference between noise and trends. Ignore the noise. Those are the minor variances perfectly within an acceptable range. But always strictly monitor trends. A small, seemingly insignificant variance that repeats every single month is often a much bigger red flag, indicating a systemic issue than a large, one-time hiccup.
So, the absolutely crucial point is this. Consider it a literal cheat code for scenario-based exam questions. If a question gives you a scenario where a manager is buried in data, totally overwhelmed, or unable to find the time to review operational reports, the answer is almost always implement management by exception.
I'm going to leave you with this final thought as we wrap up this explainer. Focus your energy. I know for a fact you can pass the CMA. But ask yourself right now, in your future career as a strategic controller, are you just going to be passively tracking data, or are you actually going to be actively managing the exceptions? The choice is entirely yours. Happy studying, keep up the fantastic work, and I will see you in the next explainer.